Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Investing in Women Founders panel debate. I'm Lopa Patel, Chair of Equality Charity Diversity UK, and a digital entrepreneur who's passionate about three things: innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology. So I'm really delighted, and it gives me great pleasure to first introduce SEEMA Kumar. A native of India, SEEMA is a globally recognized executive with a lifelong passion for empowering women. She's a successful business leader by day and spends her weekends and evenings focusing on building SEEMA, which is a global network and a multidimensional platform to connect South Asian women and to increase our representation and spotlight contributions globally. So over to you, SEEMA.
Thank you, Lopa, and good evening, everybody. It's just wonderful. First of all, happy International Women's Day. And cheers to all of us. We all choose to challenge, and that's the theme of this year's International Women's Day, as you all know. So as Lopa said, by day I focus on being a business leader, but one of my big passion is about empowering women, South Asian women, and women leaders overall, and women entrepreneurs. And so I'm really delighted that we're having this session today as part of the SEEMA Summit. So our vision for SEEMA Summit actually builds upon a successful summit that we had last year, exactly on March 8th. And that was the inaugural summit. We were also celebrating SEEMA's first birthday, not SEEMA Kumar's, but SEEMA, the platform's first birthday, because we had launched as a media platform, and then we were celebrating a year. It was interesting because the summit was just an extraordinary gathering of women who came together, spoke about all kinds of things, from entrepreneurship to investments in women, to work-life balance, to fitness and health, and how to succeed in a corporate life, and of course STEM. But the conversation of the day obviously had to do with COVID, because the next day New York City went into lockdown. We had our event in New York City. New York City went into lockdown, and to this day, most of us who met there, we all recall the SEEMA Summit with great fondness. That it was a last time that we had been to a large gathering and had a chance to connect, not virtually, but actually in person. And so SEEMA Summit 2021 is building on the success of that inaugural event, but every challenge has a silver lining, and so does the pandemic, in that had we done this summit in New York City, we would not have had the opportunity to welcome our colleagues from London, from Sydney, from Mumbai, and from Manhattan all together. And so this virtual summit offers us the opportunity to be global. And so what we're doing is, this year's summit is a streamlined content as well as live that covers multitude of topics. And so I just want to say we're gathering around the globe and gathering around the focus of choosing to challenge. And with that, I want to say a real sincere thank you to Lopa for organizing this session, and really looking forward to listening to all of your comments and this panel. So thank you. Over to you, Lopa.
So let me move straight on to introduce 5 amazing women whom I hope I can call friends. It really does feel like a chat with friends. And these 5 amazing women, between them, have created, developed, and mentored hundreds of businesses. And so I'm very, very grateful they've taken the time to come and support me and to support SEEMA and really support us all. So with us today, we have Joyeeta Das, who is a serial entrepreneur focusing on bringing value to deep tech entrepreneurial pursuits. She's the co-founder and CEO of AI company Guyana. I hope I pronounced that correctly. We also have Priya Guha, who is a venture partner at Merian Ventures, investing in women-led innovation. And Priya is also a member of the Innovate UK Council and a non-executive director at Digital Catapult. Joining us also today is Gurpreet Manku, who I'm delighted to say is a trustee of Equality Charity Diversity UK, but she's also BVCA's Deputy Director General and Director of Policy and a board member at the BVCA, being British Venture Capital Association. Is that correct? I hope I got that right. We have Deepali Nangia, who is a venture partner at Speed Invest and an advisor to female founders around their fundraising. She's also an angel investor and part of the VC fund, which is Atomico's angel program. And finally, but not least by any means, is Neeta Patel, founding CEO of the Centre for Entrepreneurs, which is the UK's leading entrepreneur development program and home of the New Entrepreneurs Fast Track, or NEF Plus program. So welcome to you all. Before moving on to specifics, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit about the state of investment in the UK, particularly in women-led businesses. And I am going to talk about the Rose Review. I'm sorry if some of you have been talking about the Rose Review for months, or it seems like, you know, at least a year. But the Rose Review came about when in 2019, the Treasury commissioned Alison Rose, CEO of the NatWest Group, to lead an independent review of female entrepreneurship in Britain. And it's really, the report is out, it's been published, and the review shed light on the barriers women face to starting and growing their businesses. And amongst the findings that, you know, struck a chord with me were around the investment angle. So for example, it found that only 13% of senior people on UK investment teams were women. And indeed, it found that almost half, which is about 48% of investment teams, had no women at all. The report identified that the UK is a startup capital of Europe, attracting more venture capital than any other country in Europe, and yet only 5.6% of UK women run their own companies. It looked at the reasons why some of this was happening, and it was things like access to funding, risk awareness, primary care responsibilities, and perception of skills that were needed to be an entrepreneur. And it also found, for example, that women are very much underrepresented in high value sectors, manufacturing, IT and communications, and financial services. So all pretty, I think, quite dark and, you know, gloomy, but the real prize, and it really articulated it well, is that by boosting female entrepreneurship, we could add £250 billion to the economy. But let me start with my panel. Joyeeta, let me start with you first, if that's all right. I mean, you have set up the venture, so I'd love to know, well, I've got two questions really. Firstly, how did you fund and set up your venture?
Thanks for asking that, Lopa. So interestingly, I tried to found two businesses before this, one in 2009 and one in 2011, when I was not even out of my grads. And I completely failed to even set them up about 10 years ago because, you know, in 2011, I actually did not get any funding at all. And there was also a very low level of political correctness in 2011. So I wasn't even told nice things. I was actually told on my face that this looks like an imbalanced founding team because, you know, there were two women and we were trying to get funding for a nonprofit tech venture. Things have changed in the last 10 years, and I think that it certainly got better for me, and I was finally able to set up two companies in the last 8 years, and they both turned out okay. And the recent one, Guyana, we actually exited our product in the first 3 years, so we could do much better. But if I compare it to my first experience, and if that was on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being absolutely impossible and 1 being, God, this is so smooth. If that was 9, I think I was at around 6 for Guyana, whereas 1 to 3 is probably where all my male entrepreneur friends are on an average. So how did I go about funding it? Couple of things. We are entirely VC funded. We've raised about around close to 5 to 6 million, and it was entirely venture capital funded. I think what I found was there is we found the right investors, but we had to look a bit longer. And I know that because I actually maintain my own CRM and timelines, and always checked with my other entrepreneur friends, both male and female, to see how it's going. And I found that in general, it took us a bit longer to get the right fit. Whereas I think that my male co-founder friends from other companies kind of got there a little bit faster. So it did take us a bit longer, for sure. And I thought that could it be very unique to us? Maybe our business idea took longer. It may not be particularly true for all women. So I actually checked with the women founder community, and I there's a community that I run myself. There's about 100 plus women founders in that community, and we all pooled our data together, and I found that this is true in general. It did take us a bit longer, about 30 to 50% longer than an entirely male co-founding team, to be able to raise funds for very similar ideas. So I'd say we overcompensate without recognizing it, and we definitely do, and it takes us a bit longer. But I think from 2011, when I walked into a room and someone told me on my face that the team looks imbalanced, where's a man in this team, to where we are today, we've definitely made progress.
Thank you. That's great. 30% longer for women-led founders. Neeta, let me bring you in here, because you have many years of experience supporting female founders. Is that something you've come across? What do you think works well with female founders?
Let me. There's a very interesting piece of research just been published, which really will resonate with Joyeeta. It's been published by Professor Dana Kanzi at London Business School with other academics, where empirically they've shown that investors penalize female founders for lack of investment fit. So I read the research, and there's others. I mean, it says female founders on average get less investment than their male counterparts, on lower valuations. And critically for me, and quite worrying, they retain less equity than their male counterparts. Now, this is the first time I've seen this research. But the additional thing is that they suffer worse funding outcomes if they're starting a business in the sector that is perceived to be male dominated. So Joyeeta, working in AI and deep tech, yes, I'm not surprised, because there's research that actually proves that is the case. What am I seeing? I work with very, very much earlier stage, so first-time founders in their 20s, mid 20s, both men and women. About 35% of our cohorts are women. I'm seeing exactly that. I mean, Joyeeta has raised a significant amount of money. My cohorts are raising early stage funding, so anything from 50 to $1 million. It seems to take longer. I don't know why. Well, I have some views. They have to knock on many more doors. In many ways, they need more champions, men and women, than perhaps their male counterparts do. And also, they for some reason they seem, and I think this is I don't want to drive it into women think differently, but they seem to come across. I don't think this is true, but they seem to come across as less ambitious. They haven't got the big grand story to tell that I see their male counterparts. And that's maybe I like the views of Deepali, who also sees quite a few, and Priya and others. But that's kind of where I'm sitting at.
Thanks. Deepali, would you want to come in on that? I mean, you're a business mentor, angel investor. I'm sure you've seen many ambitious founders. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think women suffer from what you might call imposter syndrome, probably. And I definitely see that they're not pitching the big vision which a VC fund wants. I do find that more often than not. And, when I am mentoring, I do try and, do some coaching around that and the storytelling around that. So definitely, I completely agree with Neeta. But, lots of this is such a complicated topic to really talk about. There's so many different, women. I'm a governor at a primary school here in Kensington, and I was reading, I think, a board report from a few months ago, and one of the teachers was talking about these little girls, and she was trying to encourage them to speak about their achievements, and the report said that the girls are not they feel that they're talking about themselves means it's bragging, and they're not interested in doing that. So, it's something that's, inherent from such a young age that it needs to be changed from that, so she was trying to basically encourage them to get over that hump. So some of it is, cultural. There's so many nuances in this conversation that I'm not sure we have enough time today, but I definitely see that they're not pitching the bigger vision. But in terms of, general funding, I feel deals traditionally get done in all boys networks. That's how I've seen things get done. A man will call up his 5 buddies and say, I'm looking at this deal, let's fund it. Women tend to have, don't have access to those networks. Women don't have access to warm intros. Women get judged based on performance, men get judged based on potential. And I love Dana Khanzi. I've spent a lot of time with her on all her research. She came and spoke at one of my events at Alma Angels. There's so many different, the people who get funded are people who get funded easier. Even the women who get funded easier are second-time founders, and women tend to be fewer second-time founders just because they've not been through that journey before. And sorry. Yeah.
No, I just think that's picking up on what Joyeeta was saying, was that, her first 2 ventures were down at, sort of 2 or 3, and it was only her third venture, which was in AI, so obviously there's some learnings there. But let me come to Gurpreet. Let's talk about VC funding, and Joyeeta mentioned that they are funded, largely VC funded. A recent report from Crunchbase showed that of all the VC funding in the UK, only 2.3% is going to women-led startups. And it's in fact gone in reverse from the previous year. So what do you think institutions and organizations and sort of some of your members can do to reduce the barriers to VC funding?
So there is a huge amount that firms can do, and trade associations and other groups and bodies, many of whom we liaise with and some of whom are on the call today. I've been the BVCA's representative on the BEIS and Treasury Review Board that's looking at the implementation of the Rose Review recommendations. And I would encourage people to look at what that report said, because there are some actionable items which we are following through on. So the first thing was to create an Investing in Women code. It's up on the Treasury's website, and a number of VCs have actually signed up to that code. So if you're out there looking for funding, you've got a group of VCs who've committed to provide data to Treasury on the amount of money going into female-led and mixed teams and so forth, and a few other metrics there. It's a code which not only covers VC, but also angel investing and the banks as well. But there's a whole list of firms that have committed to that code and committed to actions to increase the diversity of their pipeline and the investments that they make. So there are a group of investors you should reach out to from that. There is a report due to be published at some point this year on the data that's come through so far. One of the second actions was to set up a council bringing together investors, angel networks, and some founders to think about how to actually help firms instigate that change. So to move from that to 2.3% figure. I've still got the 1% figure in my mind, which still gets quoted back to me as well. And recently, the BVCA published a set of guidelines that had been written by investors for investors, looking at all sorts of actionable items and actionable areas that firms of all sizes, whether they're large or small, could implement to help them improve D&I in their own processes, but help them to diversify their pipeline as well. Now, if I was to summarize that, because there's several pages of feedback and recommendations here, if I was to summarize that, I would encourage investors to commit to transparency, to look at their own processes, their own investment processes, and then also commit to increasing access to themselves as a firm. The last point is particularly interesting and important because what we've heard on this call is real. There's data out there by the British Business Bank which demonstrates that a lot of leads are warm leads, and that eventually leads to investment. And venture firms need to think beyond their own networks. So there is some work underway. The firms will look at their own websites, look at how they talk about themselves. Are they themselves accessible? Are they clear about what they're looking for? Are they supporting community groups and other networks who are trying to train up that next generation of founders? Do they have scout or referral programs? There's lots of ways out there to help increase access to that VC funding in the first place. Then firms also need to look at their own investment processes. Are there biases there? When they're looking at committee discussions, are they perhaps spending a bit more time on the warm leads rather than the ones that have come through? There's, a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily intentional. So there's things firms can think about that. And I'm going to finish again on transparency, because I think the more data we have, the better. When you commit to providing data and reporting on something, it generally gets done. And I think we all agree with that. And linked to that, there needs to be a little bit more accountability within the firm to help achieve the targets that you set yourself as well. So lots of information has been published in recent months, and I did encourage you all to look into all of that.
Thank you, Gurpreet. That's great. I mean, just picking up on something Deepali said, that a lot of deals are done in the old boys network. And I feel that sometimes we try and just find homegrown solutions to things when actually we need to be looking at examples from elsewhere. So let me bring Priya in here. Priya, you've had a stellar international career as a diplomat based in Silicon Valley and in the UK. What do you think we can learn from Silicon Valley or other parts of the world? What are the sort of positive solutions to this chain of funding? And I also want to explore some of the initiatives you're involved with at Digital Catapult and at Innovate UK. So I just wondered if I can bring you in there.
Thank you so much, Lopa. And I think, the reality is this is very much a shared challenge. And when you have a shared challenge, you need to be looking for shared solutions. And actually, this is why it's great we're talking about this at an event like the SEEMA Summit, because this is bringing women and other people together from across the world to focus on what is a shared challenge around the underinvestment in women and other underrepresented groups more broadly. If you look at specific regions and examples, I don't suggest for one second that Silicon Valley can be held up as the icon of equality in this regard. However, there are some really interesting initiatives that have happened in the US and that have been supported by the tech and investment community in Silicon Valley. I think there are one to point to is probably actually the role of limited partners in terms of stimulating the right sorts of change in how their investments are managed by VC funds. So it is very much within the realm of the rights of an LP to be saying, actually, we want you to be looking to target this towards underrepresented groups. We want you to be looking to target this funding towards sustainability as another area of current focus. And that's a really interesting model that I don't think we've really replicated yet to the degree we can here in the UK. I think, looking at another example that I wanted to share is actually around the role of different governments and the interventions and the positive influence that governments can make in this regard. The Nordics have always been held up for me as an area, and I think it's very fair, where actually the use of government interventions, the use of government funding has been often to create a sort of nudge in societal behaviour. And I think there's much more scope in the UK. And I think this is probably the case in the US as well, actually, to be thinking about how can government interventions achieve the acceleration of the changes that we want to see. And a very concrete example here in the UK at the moment is, how can a lot of the interventions that we've seen the government bring in in response to the COVID pandemic be used to actually focus in on securing much better equitable access to that funding for female founders, who come from a diverse background in the broader sense. Just jumping across to your second part of your question there, Lopa, around what organisations like the Digital Catapult and Innovate UK have been thinking about around this area of equality, diversity and inclusion. I think this is where, Gurpreet just talked about it now. Focusing on data has been, for me, the biggest fundamental change that we've seen. Innovate UK has, in what has been, sometimes received as quite a bold move, started to mandate the collection of data around ED&I, in contrast to a model where it was previously voluntary. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have solid information to go on. And to Gurpreet's point about how we can track that from the perspective of a VC fund, for example, or from the British Business Bank's perspective, actually, this is fundamental to think about where is the money going and what is the impact of that money on the growth of the companies that you're supporting. To also add one really concrete example, just yesterday on International Women's Day in the UK, Innovate UK announced the Women in Innovation Awards, which are a fantastic moment, I think, for us in the UK to recognise, in this case, 40 outstanding women who are building innovation, tech-heavy businesses like Joyeeta's in the UK. And those businesses not only get the opportunity to get access to funding and support around how the businesses scale, but also are very much positioned as role models for the next generation. So we go back to what Deepali was saying about how do we create an environment where it's seen to be, the height of success if women go into entrepreneurship careers and build their own businesses. And we've actually started something where at Innovate UK, those women go back to the schools that they were in, and there's what's called a purple plaque. So a plaque that's set up in that school to say that X or Y individual who's received a Women in Innovation Award went actually to this school. And so kids, whether they're sort of 5 or 6 or maybe even 15, 16, 17, looking at their solid future careers, have that ability to visualize the art of the possible, which is just a really powerful dynamic, I think.
Joyeeta, I hope you don't mind me telling everybody that you've recently had a baby who's now 2 weeks old. Let's just talk about that balancing act. So on the one hand, you're running a high-tech venture, and on the other hand, you have a 2-week-old. How do you manage that balancing act, and what would you like to see as support for yourself and other women like you?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because this is probably one of the biggest questions that women founders face. How do they balance the two? And I have so many friends, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but they're absolutely terrified of progressing their personal lives because they feel they will be penalized severely. And to the extent that we often have these Friday chats in the Women Founders Forum that I created a few years ago. And almost always 90% of the topic is, I cannot move forward in my life because I feel it's just going to hold back everything else that I've built with such great difficulty. And I also have lots of male co-founder friends from the tech world who are probably 28, 30, the same age group as these women who are talking to me. I've never once heard from them how much they're not going to have a baby or think about their life just because they have this. So there is definitely this huge pressure. And I can see where that comes from. I have to say, in my current company, the investors and the board composition that I have, I've got ridiculously lucky. They supported me outstandingly. But in general, I do find there is a great fear. And I think that's because we come from an ecosystem in general, personally and professionally, where we are told that it's always a choice, one of the two. There is no way to have both. And that's based on the assumption that you're going to be the primary caregiver for almost everything. And based based on that fundamental assumption, we've created a social, economic, and financial system where the basis, the subconscious basis of every decision is, well, if she does that, where's she going to get the bandwidth and time for something else? And I think this should change, because this should be a distributed load. Like, we never look at a business model and look at the VAT returns or the office rent and say, this makes the model look lopsided. You expect that to be built in, right? So if the business is going to have females and they're going to have a maternity leave, why is that an overhead or an extra expense or difficult? It should be built into the model. You're not going to penalize people for going to the toilet. That's just something that happens. So, why this? Is it something so extraordinary? Like, human children are not getting born on this planet. How are we 8 billion then? So I feel like this is primarily the problem. But I do notice that things are changing, and one of the things I've noticed with the set of shareholders I have now is that even when they don't completely understand how they can support, I have the dialogue where I told them, you can ask me if you don't know. So I think to some extent, allowing people to help you by opening up and asking them to ask questions, even if they're not always perfectly correct, is a good first step. Because we have this great culture right now. If someone's even slightly wrong, we just penalize them so much they dare not ask a question again. They just shut down, like, oh my God, I could make a huge mistake if I ask this woman this question. And by doing that, we're really shutting the door. So I actually opened up and I said, do you have any questions about this? Like, are you in fear of something? Do you think I'm going to disappear? Is there something I can address? And I found that they opened up and they asked questions, some of them for the first time ever, and it was a great dialogue. So while we get to the political correct version of how to support women to continue their personal lives and balance it with professional lives, we should allow the incorrect political versions in between. And I think that onus is also on women, not just on the system. We should both open up a little bit. And I'll end with just one more thing. I think one thing that helped me balance, I don't balance, I think I drop them all the time, so I'm not very balanced. They're always falling around me. But the few microseconds that I end up holding them up in my hand is because I made a very conscious decision. And I don't know if this is something every woman should do. Should we be in a system that forces us to think like that? Or should we be in a planet that doesn't allow us to think like that is a philosophical question. But I made a very conscious decision, I think almost about 7-8 years ago, that I'm going to optimize for a life where I have people who actually contribute to this. If they're not going to contribute to my success and my progress, they're not going to be a part of it. They're not just going to be friends and family and relatives who are just pulling me down. So I consciously created an ecosystem of friends, family, my partner, who actually believe and live by this philosophy and support me. I don't think there's any other way I could have done it. But should the onus be on women like us to make these decisions and create our lives, or should the onus be a little bit shared with the system that they naturally think like this? Is a philosophical question, but I definitely made that decision very consciously and crafted my life extremely consciously, where I was able to get support, and I did not make decisions where I knew that this is going to result in friends and relationships where what I want to do and who I want to become will not be supported. But I think it requires tremendous mental strength, and is this something we should ask of everyone?
Can I bring Priya in here? I think you wanted to comment.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Lopa. I mean, it was so resonating, I think, to hear Joyeeta's story. But the comment I was going to make is that, this is where I think we have an opportunity as society, as, a working environment, to look at what we've been forced to do as a result of the COVID pandemic and see what the good things are that we can take away from that. And actually, one of the things that I think has been really good is the opportunity to actually give people much greater flexibility and ownership. I don't fundamentally believe that we can or we should go back to the classic sort of office 9-to-5 routine. It was never 9 to 5 anyway, but the theory of a 9-to-5 office. Actually, one of the opportunities to both allow entrepreneurs of every background to thrive in that career, but also to encourage people back to the workplace, the returners agenda, which I think is really, really important for the future economic growth of every country around the world, is to have a much more flexible working model. And it's not going to happen by accident. I think there's a slight assumption that some of these good things will stay. I don't think that's the case. I think we all really need to think consciously about how can we preserve the best bits of working culture that we've had to do as a result of the pandemic in whatever future environment there is.
Well said, Priya, well said.
Can I just add to something Priya said? A slight worry in my mind, not just about women founders, but, new joiners in companies, new graduates who've been onboarded virtually. One of the key things I say to my young entrepreneurs is build your network. Go to everything, ask for referrals, start building your VC networks now. You might need them in 10 years' time. Same thing with graduates joining large companies, where building your networks and getting the support from other people in your organization is critical. And I have a slight worry that with a new kind of hybrid model of working, that networks element is missing, because you can't build a network on Zoom. You don't have that water cooler conversation. You don't meet somebody very senior in a lift that you might suddenly start a conversation with. So, I agree that the flexible working is absolutely here to stay, but I don't have an answer for how people should build active networks. So any ideas and thoughts from the panel?
Strangely enough, I think Zoom has leveled the playing field, because I do know founders. I spoke to GPs last year who were pregnant and had babies and said to me, our investors had no idea that we were pregnant on the other side of the Zoom call, and we managed to raise our whole round. And to be honest, it shouldn't be like that. Again, like Joyeeta said, I don't hear many men say that, guess what, I'm having a baby, so I'm going to pause everything, right? So, but that is the reality of the situation. And I...
Sorry, carry on.
So that is the reality of the situation. And in my view, I have women come to me and ask me, what should I do? Should I tell my investors I'm pregnant? I'm not sure what to do. I have people in my portfolio, founders in my portfolio tell me, I interviewed a pregnant woman. I'm not sure what to do. Should I give her the job? These are questions that come up every day, even now.
Just moving on from, family and caring responsibilities, I want to come back to you, Neeta, just to talk about scaling up. So let's assume you're fortunate enough, you've started up and you want to sort of start scaling up your ventures. In your experience, can you just tell us a little bit about, firstly, congratulations on the partnership with Founders Factory. That's, enormously exciting, or Founders Forum rather, enormously exciting. But what do you hope to achieve jointly together?
We have always believed in, we're a support organization. We are here, we exist to help and support young people to start businesses and create jobs and have an input into the economy. And scale is as important for support organizations as it is for any startup. And at some point, the only way you can scale is in partnership. The UK is a very fragmented market in many ways, not just the number of organizations that are out there, the accelerators and incubators, but also, I would argue, the number of kind of investment funds and avenues of funding. So we've always started from the principle of how can we scale, and we should do this in partnership. So this is where the Founders Forum partnership came around. Two organizations coming together. Founders Forum, of course, started by Brent Hoberman, a very well-known, successful entrepreneur. And over the years, we've been working in parallel, sort of trying to address the same problems in the same kind of ways. And we felt it was better to come together and have a bigger impact. So the partnership will help us scale the program nationally. It will help us scale in terms of size, the number of candidates we can take, and crucially for us, access to candidates from non-traditional backgrounds, underserved communities, which going forward in the next 5 years is a really important focus for us. So that really is the basis for the partnership. I fully expect to be announcing other partnerships with other organizations because I genuinely believe that organizations like us should really be working together rather than trying to get scarce resources, which are then split so many different ways. That's my view. I don't know if my panelists would agree.
Thank you, Neeta. I just want to come in with a question. There's a great question here from Poonam Malik. Poonam, do you want to ask your question directly? I'll unmute you if that's... You happy with that?
And we are sort of toying with the same issue that female founders do not get funded is one issue, but people of color or underestimated or underrepresented founders, as we are hearing from Joyeeta or Deepali, is a challenge. And the initiatives are fine and they can be binding as long as there is some co-investment aspect from the government funding or supported. But besides that, if it's not there and VC groups or angel investors are independent, how do either push that angle, or how I don't want to use the twist their arm, but how do we make it binding on them to start using the D&I data publishing?
Great question. So can I, Joyeeta's got a hand up, but before I come to you, Joyeeta, can I just bring in Gurpreet and Priya, both of them? Go you first, because you've done a lot of work with the Rose Review, and I think perhaps you've got some solutions there.
Yeah, so there's an element of people signing up to these things when they see more of their competitors do it, frankly. So I think the fact that there have been a number of firms that have signed up and committed to give data to government to publish in aggregate is a good thing, because investors in their funds, so these investors need to get money from somewhere. Investors in those funds are now also asking these questions. So what does the diversity of your investment team look like? Does your organization as a whole look like? And where are you putting your money? What's the makeup of the management teams and founders that you're giving money to? So I think more and more investors are asking those questions, regardless of whether they're linked to government or not. The Investing in Women Code is a fairly new code, but there were a number of firms that signed up last year, so I'm looking forward to seeing that data. The British Business Bank published data of from applications to the Future Fund. They aggregated information on management teams rather than founders, and there were some reasons for that, but it's a start. So I think I'd expect to see any future iterations of central codes or recommendations for central surveys. I think there should be more disaggregated data, because you can't, I mean, we're South Asian women, but you can't just group Black people with Asians and other minority, other ethnic groups to come up with your number, because there's lots of issues with that. So I'm seeing a little bit more progress in the sense of people attempting to collect this data and publish it. But I agree that there is more to come. I'm only aware of maybe 1 or 2 firms that publish this data on their website, which is interesting, because I think the more firms that do that themselves will be better. But I expect there to be more LP pressure, so investor pressure over time, and also just the feeling that if my competitors are doing, I should be doing this as well.
So thank you, Gurps. That's a great idea. Yeah. Can I bring Joyeeta in? And Priya, I'll come back to you in a second, just because I can see Joyeeta jumping up and down. Queen of data, Joyeeta, come on, give us some solutions.
Yeah, I just live data. Now, I wanted to point out one more thing quickly, because we are talking so much about funding not being accessible. There's another phenomenon which is quite identical, which is getting funding but at really low valuations, which is the equity point that Neeta mentioned, effectively becomes the same thing. And it's at least happened to 3 other women in UK alone that I know really well, where deep tech ventures are almost impossible to build, because we require much more rounds of funding. That's how deep tech is. It's a longer drawn out process of exit, and it's a bigger value, but you require more funding. But if you have significant significant amounts of dilution right from the beginning, then your ownership is so ridiculously low, a couple of rounds down, you're no longer eligible to get funding from the tier one funds across the world, because they look at your cap table and they say, you don't have ownership. And this has happened to 3 women that I already know in UK, and 1 I know from New York, and they are first degree contacts. So I wonder what the overall sample size is. And I've noticed how that happens. I've been in rooms where men have negotiated very similar valuations for deep tech ventures, and they were just considered very professional, trying to do the right thing for themselves. And I've seen mixed founding teams and women doing that. And normally the response from my friends on the investment side of the world was like, she doesn't seem like a person I want to work with, just because she pushed back really hard on the valuation. So it's a bit of a perception thing, but this really gets in the way of funding, especially tech. Because even if I do receive funding, if you're going to push me down to an off-market valuation, what it means is I don't really have a future with this capital and this venture. And this is something a lot of women face. So I just wanted to throw it out there that it's not just access to funding, it's the terms in which you get it, ratchets, dirty term sheets, and things like that.
Yep, low valuations. Priya, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to absolutely agree with what Joyeeta said there, it is really shocking how women often come out with a significantly worse deal, whether that's through bad advice at the beginning or through facing the sorts of prejudices that Joyeeta's identified there in terms of negotiations. And that is just something that will disadvantage over the very long term. The comment I was going to make was actually back to Poonam's question. And I think, there's 2 points I would make. Firstly, that I wouldn't disregard the impact of government funding, because I think it will be increasingly the case over the next few years that the government will remain a significant LP in most of the biggest UK or European VC funds. So that creates, I believe, a real opportunity for the sorts of forcing acceleration of change that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. I think the last maybe links back to what I think Deepali might have been wanting to come in and say earlier, was actually that the data is really important, but only if the data is reliable and consistent. And I think we have seen in the UK, at least, a move that isn't creating an ability to get what I would see as the right data, i.e. things like treating the stats around gender to be based on the actual founding team, the cap table of that business, not what the company's own perception of the diversity of their senior management is, as we saw on initiatives like the Future Fund at the beginning. So I think there is a real opportunity for all of us to come together and define what the right sorts of data we should be tracking are, and then to have that consistency across government interventions, across private funding, so that we actually make sure that we're tracking this properly. And that's the case for female founders. It is, as Gurps was saying, really relevant for our need to look at things like Black founders and their inability to get funding here in the UK as well.
Just to add on, Poonam's asking, Priya, if you could just clarify a little bit about what you mean about right data and also the D&I makeup of the team.
So I wouldn't profess to have, the spot on answer. You're probably better qualified to comment on that, Poonam, based on the research you've done so far. But I think, from my perspective, it is about stepping back and thinking, why are we focused on this? And from my perspective, we're focused on this because actually you are unleashing economic growth and economic potential by investing in underrepresented groups, in this case, women, but the conversation goes broader. And the only way you unleash that economic potential is if your definition of whether that person is genuinely a female founder or genuinely a underrepresented founder is the cap table. Because that's where the value of that company will in the long term be released or not. And it is, to Joyeeta's comment, sadly, all too often to see women who have a very, very weak stake on the cap table, which will mean in the long term, they are out of the value of that business. or indeed that women get brought in to be the sort of token female on the leadership team without the actual stake or long-term economic value potential from that business. So I think we need to be really tough with ourselves about defining what is an underrepresented founder in this context, and making sure we held ourselves to account and are transparent about it. We're not going to get this right on every occasion, and some of the figures will be tough reading, but that's part of the journey. And I think if we can accept that that is part of the journey, we'll get much further in the long run.
Let me bring SEEMA in here. SEEMA, you've been listening in so well. Women investing in women. What's your global perspective? Because you've seen amazing women in India and South Asia and in America and Australia. And what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for women to look out for themselves and look out for the community. I think being in leadership positions, having a seat at the table, not just because it's a token thing to do, but to really have a voice at the table is important. But I think there is one other person in the ecosystem that we need to work with very closely, and that's the man. And so I think male champions, we call them ambassadors, which are male ambassadors, and male champions are, a key part of the equation, because they have to make space for us to take space. And so they have to leave the table, and I don't mean that literally, but they have to make space at the table for women to have a voice and a seat at the table. And until we have that, we will continue to fight an uphill battle. And so the key question is, women supporting women is phenomenal, and I think it's a price of entry, must do. But I think, how do we get male champions to help us move the needle as well? And I think that that's the next conversation. And I love this idea of making it more transparent and having reports come out about the level of investment in women and women-owned businesses, because I think that level of transparency is required. And perhaps there ought to be an index of some sort where, venture capital funds get ranked. Just like there's a Dow Jones Sustainability Index, where when you invest in something that is, doing good for the environment, you get high marks. Similarly, an index like that would make a lot of sense. So how do we move the needle that way? And we have to band together. We also have to bring, and it's so nice to see Sunil has joined us as a male champion for today in our panel. Thank you for joining us, because I think that partnership is going to be very important.
Thank you, SEEMA. Sunil, would you like to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite funny because yesterday on LinkedIn, I published that over the last few months, I found myself in a number of meetings as being the only male in the meeting for very good reasons. And it made me reflect last week what it must have been like for some of you to be the only female in a meeting.
Yeah.
And maybe if that's still the case today. And it hit me really hard. And I just wanted the voice, and I voiced on LinkedIn that I will always be a proactive ally and supporter of women in business. And that's my stand. And 2,600 views later, people are still liking. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to hear the conversation. And, I have two daughters in their 20s. So I see it firsthand in terms of being a South Asian young female, what it means to break into the world of business and the biases. And you just give them an opportunity and platform, and they shine. They totally shine. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunil. And I absolutely get your point that, you're the sole male on the panel. And in fact, yes, I have already had that comment, how come you've got 6, women and all female panel when we always sort of protest against manels, all male panels.
Absolutely.
And the answer is, it's very, very simple. 6 amazing women are all focused on supporting women entrepreneurs. I mean, that's really, do you know how difficult that is? I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time to find such amazing women. I'm conscious of time, so let me come back to all of my panelists and just say, what piece of advice would you give to women founders who are thinking of starting up today? Let me start with Neeta.
Okay, I will say what I say to every single female who graduates from my program with an ambition to start a business. One is think big, tell a big story, tell everyone what you want to achieve. Don't be shy, because part of that is when you've gone public with your vision, it encourages you to deliver it and actually do it. It's an accountability thing. Second thing is the importance of building a network and continuing to build that network. Surprisingly, women aren't very good at this. Men are superb at this, especially in the startup space. And thirdly, don't be a perfectionist. Don't wait till it's perfect before you launch. Launch, learn, relaunch, learn. And the fourth thing, I've just read Anne Boden's book, banking on it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be disasters. Keep going. Don't give up.
Thank you, Neeta. Let me come to Joyeeta. What word of wisdom would you give to women founders?
Oh my God, I'm not sure I'm wise enough to do that.
All right, any words of wisdom?
Because I make so many mistakes myself. But this is the first thing I'd say. You're going to make mistakes. And the thing is, everyone does. So you don't have to be the best thing since sliced bread. You just need to get through today, because that's pretty much what everybody's doing. And that's pretty much my mantra for everything, not just entrepreneurship. We pressurize ourselves so much, and we are so harsh to ourselves. There was this research that the number of words we speak to ourselves, it has been found that the words that women say to themselves are so harsh. We are terrible critics and judges of ourselves. So I'd say maybe just be easy and get through today, because if you get through today, you'll get through tomorrow, and one day at a time, it'll work out. It doesn't have to be a plan to the end of eternity.
Thank you. That's great. Gurps.
I was going to say, don't give up seeking out additional funding or funding for the first time. There are more firms out there nowadays taking it much more seriously than may have been the case. I mentioned the code as an example because that's up on the government's website, but there's also another organisation called Diversity VC, which has established a standard. And 15 firms have now signed up to that standard and achieved that watermark. So again, there are firms out there you can reach out to because they've publicly committed to supporting female founders. So just keep on pushing. For my part, we're committed to continue this dialogue internally as well. I appreciate that I'm not an entrepreneur, but I do speak on behalf of the investors. And as a trade body, we've said we're going to use our profile to champion the change that we think is desperately needed.
Your piece of advice to your many founders that you mentor.
I wanted to read something out, but I'll give you my first piece of advice, which is I would never take no for an answer, because my son does this 10 times a day. Like, can I eat a chocolate? Can I eat a chocolate? And 11th time, I'm always like, you can eat that chocolate. So, I mean, I think you should always ask. Always, I'm a big fan of cold. I've invested in 2 women. I have a portfolio of 15 women I've invested in now, and I've invested in 2 women just cold, reached out to me on LinkedIn, did some research on me. So when they did send me the deck, they were like, we know this is a sector you're interested in. So that made me, get some comfort that at least they know what I'm interested in investing in, and I invested. So I'm a big fan of reaching out cold, and trying again. Sometimes people get busy, send a reminder, because I feel women don't then want to, send another email because they feel they haven't heard back. But I think people are so busy. I look at so many decks, every single day. Sometimes I'm just behind. So, I mean, I think we should just own, all our female superpowers and use them to our advantage whenever we can.
Thank you, Deepali. Such great words of wisdom. Priya.
So I would add maybe a very personal one, which is I think the thing that's been most powerful for me in all of my different careers over the years is actually having what I call a tribe of people around me who, a bit like Joyeeta was saying at the beginning, are people who you can be very honest with, you can share your darkest moments, but will also be there to celebrate the highs with you and to be your cheerleaders in the outside world. I think that's an invaluable long-term life resource for you as a female founder or for you as a woman in any career path. And I think that is something I would recommend to anybody who is looking to start their journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to give the last word to SEEMA, because part of this all came about because SEEMA, you initiated the SEEMA Summit and you reached out to me, and I'm sending a virtual hug to my speakers because really I do feel so supported by them. But SEEMA, over to you.
Well, thank you, Lopa, and thank you to all of you. I mean, this has been just an incredible panel. I think we could go on for another hour with, lots of pearls of wisdom. I wish I could have caught them all. And good news is that you're taping it, Lopa. So we're going to rebroadcast it, and I would say broadcast it on the SEEMA platform on Sunday. And the session is scheduled then. So I would urge you all, if you're free, to tune in or share the news with others so people can all go and listen to the words of wisdom that have come out today. Just incredibly inspiring to see leadership like this in action. So Lopa, thank you so much. This was just outstanding.
Thank you,
and
SEEMA.
Happy International Women's Day.
Yes, happy International Women's Day to you all, to my panelists, Joyeeta, Neeta, Gurpreet, Priya, Deepali. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So pleased that you could join me.